Welcome to Beyond the Edge, where we dig into the ins and outs of the trends affecting modern digital businesses. I'm Andrew Johnson, your co-pilot for this episode, and today we're exploring the topic of zero-day threats, specifically how we identify and mitigate them. Joining us today are Dave Andrews, Edgio's VP of Engineering, and Marcel Flores, Lead Research Scientist at Edgio. Welcome, Dave and Marcel. It's great to have both of you here. Can you tell us a little bit about yourselves and your roles here at Edgio?
Sure. Thanks for having us, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be on. So I am VP Engineering. I've been at Edgio for I think just a shade over 11 years, and I'm responsible for the edge platforms and a lot of the kind of like central infrastructure from a engineering perspective.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. As you said, I'm Marcel Flores. I'm the lead research scientist at Edgio Labs, the research group here at Edgio. My team works on improving the performance, reliability, and operations of the network by performing rigorous research and development, as well as engaging with the broader systems and networking research community.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks again for joining us today, guys. So the topic of zero-day threats, I think it's important to quickly give our audience a background of what zero-day vulnerabilities and attacks are. I'll briefly try to cover that before we get into some of your experiences protecting Edgio and our customers. So what is a zero-day is in terms of what we're talking about here? Well, basically, modern apps, modern businesses, modern services are made up of software. Software from open source code, commercialized code bases, different protocols, etc. We know that no software is perfect, and from time to time, vulnerabilities are going to be detected in that code. Basically, zero-day refers to the time period within which a vulnerability is discovered, and the time to either come up with a patch or a workaround, right? So developers are going to, once they're known about a vulnerability, they're going to try to patch it as quickly as possible, or give customers and users of that software steps they can do to prevent the exploit. But basically, like I mentioned, it's a problem that isn't going away. We see the number of CVEs, or common vulnerabilities and exposures, increasing every year. About 25% increase in 2002 compared to 2001. It's not super surprising that more vulnerabilities are going to get spotted. There's AI tools that can scan, code bases quickly. There's certainly financial incentives for both good actors and bad actors to find these vulnerabilities. On the good actors side, there's bug bounty programs. You're familiar, Apple pushes out code fixes for your iPhone all the time. Good white hat researchers are submitting exploits to these developers. And then there's bad actors that are also exploiting vulnerabilities as well. So just a little bit of background on that. Maybe some common ones you've heard of recently. H2 rapid reset was a big, very notable thing in the application security world recently. Maybe you've heard of Log4j, Spring4Shell, or a few years back, the Apache Struts2 vulnerability that caused massive data breaches here in the United States, actually around the world. So that's just a little bit of background on zero-day threats. But maybe I'll go ahead and start with asking Dave just maybe a little bit about what you guys do to protect Edgio and our customers from zero-day threats.
Yeah, absolutely. Security, I think, is all about defense in depth, right? Like there's never any one particular thing that you do. It's more about making sure that you have like a number of layers, kind of like all strung together. The idea being, if one or two layers are imperfect, as they all are, because we have very intelligent humans actively trying to break them, the sheer number of layers and with overlapping protections and mitigations is designed. The whole point there is it doesn't matter if one thing fails because there's five other things sitting there that will protect you. So taking a step back, like the first and I think arguably one of the most important things is just generally falls into the bucket of preparedness. Right? There's at least three kind of like separate kind of like aspects to that. The first one that springs to mind for me is hygiene. Having kind of like good security hygiene is absolutely critical. And it really it helps largely by reducing your kind of like your area of concern. So what do I mean by hygiene? Um, there's two primary things. One is kind of like keeping your software up to date or kind of like regular patching. This is the most boring thing in the world. It's also arguably one of the best and kind of like most critical lines of defense. It means you take advantage of all of the responsible disclosures that you were talking about, Andrew. The good kind of like white hat researchers finding vulnerabilities, disclosing them, vendors fixing them, and rolling out fixes. You get to take advantage of all of the basically known attack vectors in the software that you're using. Just because it's boring does not necessarily mean that it's easy, especially when you're working at the scale that we are at Edgio, as well as a number of other places. It's very, very difficult to kind of like manage the risk that comes with upgrading all of your kind of like software on a regular basis. So as we'll see later on, there's a lot of things that we do operationally to make that safer and easier to do, but it still falls pretty squarely into the hygiene bucket, if you will. The next piece that kind of I think lands within hygiene is scanning, which the whole point here is like actively looking for things that are indications that you've got an issue before a bad actor finds it. So this takes a number of forms. It can be internal security teams, information security teams. You can hire external parties to perform scans. It can be both. Often organizations leverage bug bounty to kind of like basically encourage people to take the white hat route, find vulnerabilities, disclose them to us or to the particular party so they can be fixed before they're actively exploited. So those things kind of fall into this bucket of anything that you can fix that first, right? Like, take advantage of the good work that the entire community is doing to make the internet and software in general more secure, and then actively looking at your own applications, trying to find vulnerabilities and proactively fix them as best you're able. The next kind of like section I would say around preparedness is I'm going to turn over to Marcel, which is kind of on observability.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So I think another important thing to be able to do in a lot of these cases is to be able to see what's going on your network or with your infrastructure. So I think this kind of falls into two categories that are fundamentally approached the same, but I think are important to call out. The first is to sort of think about application level behaviors, right? Making sure that you understand what requests are coming into your network and sort of what the features are of those requests, how they're shaped, and what they look like normally, and what they might look like during certain events. I think it's also important to keep in mind that whenever you're communicating on the internet, right, it's a sort of full stack operation, right, where each request is going to pass through both the application layer, but also the lower level protocols. And so it's important to keep an eye on what's going on further down the stack, right? And understand that there may be complex behaviors and responses from lower level systems that aren't well captured in those application layer behaviors. So it's important to keep track of sort of both components of that and to have sort of observability into what's going on in both cases. And I think it's the sort of key piece is being able to understand when that traffic changes, right? When your traffic defies expectations, right? You might start seeing features of application requests that aren't what you normally see, right? For example, a sudden increase in HTTP posts as opposed to gets, thinking about the application layer, thinking about the protocol level, right? This may be something very intricate in protocol like HTTP2 or something even lower, and thinking about what's happening to the TCP sockets and what's going on with the protocol interactions at that level, especially when you're thinking about things like DDoS attacks that might try and exploit particular vulnerabilities. I think key to having these vulnerabilities is not only to sort of this observability is not only having metrics that allow you to see what's going on, but also have the ability to sort of dig into these behaviors, right? And to segment them accordingly, right? To understand if there's a particular user population that's generating a certain set of traffic, there's specific networks, it's specific customers, specific property of a certain customer, right? So you can understand and narrow down where things are actually happening and how they might be happening.
That's interesting. That's interesting. So what after you observe this different types of behavior or something you think might be a 0 a day, what are the some of the steps operationally that you can take or that you take?
Yeah, I can take that one, Andrew. Yeah, I think it after you so the two kind of like elements that Marcel is talking about are really the foundations, right? Like the first one is kind of like looking at trends, like which boils down to from one perspective, looking at things in aggregate, right? Like what does this look like overall? And the whole point there is you get like a high level view of what's going on, and it lets you identify changes very, very quickly, as you said. The second part, in terms of deep diving, is actually being able to tease out and develop your understanding about what changed, what level is it operating at, and is it a risk, right? Like, the internet is the wild, wild west, right? Like things change all the time. Like new behaviors are happening all the time. Not all of those things are a security issue, right? Like, so the ability to kind of like have a much broader, unaggregated set of information that lets you dig in and ask, and observe, or rather answer questions that are much more nuanced, lets you kind of like get to the heart of what has changed and why, and it lets you make that decision. Like, oh my goodness, like this is fine, it's a new customer doing something, or this is actually an issue and we need to go look. They're kind of like stepping away from seeing what's happened, developing some understanding about that it's an issue. You get into the realm of like, great, then what? Like, what do you do about it? And this bucket of kind of like we call like operational agility. And there's a few kind of like high level themes that we think through when we consider operational agility. Again, three, but those are kind of responsiveness, safety, and redundancy. So just spending a little bit of time on each of those. Responsiveness is exactly what it sounds like, right? Like when something is going wrong from a security perspective, time is of the essence, right? Like, you want to be able to close security issues very, very quickly to give the attackers like minimal time to kind of like wreak havoc and give you the maximum amount of time to clean up. So what we target from a very broad sense, not only around security issues, but just around all kind of like operational changes that we make. We target around 5 seconds to reach 99.99% of the infrastructure. That's the goal. We don't always get there because some things necessarily take longer, but that is the target. And a lot of our subsystems kind of like do meet that target. Safety is a weird kind of like theme to think about with operation agility. So let me tease that one apart a little bit. One of the risks that you have when you're trying to do something with a high level of responsiveness, i.e., very, very quickly, is that you could fix the problem very, very quickly, assuming that you have perfect observability and a perfect understanding of exactly what's happening, and you can perfectly predict the response to the change that you're about to make. That's great, and a lot of times that's the case. However, there's also the chance that your understanding of any of those things is imperfect, and you may well make it worse, also very, very quickly. Nobody wants that. So the whole point about safety is that you put systems in place and processes and automation and a lot of other things go into it to make sure that you don't, in fact, make it worse. That boils down to a couple of like very, very high level things. At the start, it's kind of like proactive modeling. This applies really heavily to kind of like basic capacity planning, right? For example, if you have to kind of like take machines out of production for some reason to patch them because it requires services to be restarted for whatever reason, one of the risks there, if you try to do that very, very quickly, is you take too many machines out of production for the load that they're currently experiencing. You can know that ahead of time, right? So we have a lot of kind of like modeling systems that integrate with workflow systems, so that when a request to patch everything as fast as you can goes, it doesn't immediately pull all servers out of production. So there are kind of like basic safety systems that you can build and integrate to prevent yourself from shooting yourself in the foot. So assuming that we're not going to make things worse from that perspective, just on a pure kind of like capacity planning infrastructure perspective, we also want to know that the change that we're making has the intended effect kind of like at the application level or at whatever level of observability application protocol, whatever it is that we're trying to mitigate. So what we do that, we leverage a system that we call Coalmine. We've blogged about it and spoken about it publicly before, but the idea there is basically everything kind of like goes out as what we call a canary. canaries in the coal mine. The point there is nothing kind of like happens globally all at once, no matter how dire it is. The minimum 2 phases for something to go out. So we put it on a subset of infrastructure, typically the infrastructure that is experiencing the event most egregiously or it's most visible. We validate that it does what we expect, and then we very quickly roll it out later on. Roll it out more broadly and validate that the overall problem kind of like resolves at a global level. So coal mine and canaries tightly integrated with their metrics and observability systems, so that you can correlate, at a glance, like what is this canary doing to the aggregated metrics that I'm looking at. So we get like real-time feedback that, hey, the change that we're making is in fact addressing the problem.
Also, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. So that's very, very handy. What we're actually working on at the moment and getting ready to launch, kind of like internally, and later on we'll productize this for customers and their configuration changes, is basically fully automated metric analysis. So currently, when we make a change like this, it requires a human to sit there and look at it, make sure that the correct thing is happening, make sure that the metrics that they're concerned about are moving in the right direction, and then basically advance the canary. Tell the system, like, great, you've passed the first phase, everything looks good. Go ahead and go to the global phase of that canary. We do this, we leverage this system for all changes, not just security operational changes, but all changes that flow throughout the system. And what we're bumping into is, as we build more and more visibility, to Marcel's point, more and more visibility, more and more metrics, more and more information about what's happening, there's more and more for the humans to look at, right? Like, and that load is reaching the point where it is too high. And so humans are starting to make mistakes, right? Like, because there's simply too many charts to look at, too many graphs to look at, and people get tired. And people are imperfect anyway. So we're launching a system called Birdwatcher, the thing that watches the canaries, basically, that does some sophisticated kind of statistical analysis on the metrics, like as the changes are rolling out, and gives it a thumb up or a thumbs down. And that's integrated with coal mine, so that we can say, hey, in an automated way, we get some indication that that canary is good, it's doing what we expect. And also separately, it's not doing anything bad that we don't expect, and that rollout will proceed without any human intervention. So super excited about that. That's going to make our responsiveness even faster and even safer. So those are the main things that we consider when we're talking about safety, being able to quickly and safely make the problem go away. The final point that I mentioned was redundancy, which is relatively self-explanatory. There's a key kind of like point or philosophy that we leverage and deploy, which is basically dual path. For a lot of these changes, as many as we can muster. So what dual path means, the 2 paths that we think through are basically fast, best effort, and slow, reliable. The idea there being, we operate a large amount of infrastructure in very, very kind of like disparate places all around the world. The ability to hit everything with 100% reliability in a few seconds is a fairy tale. Like, that's not something that is like feasibly possible. Something somewhere is always kind of like having an issue, and there's not really anything you can do about it. So what we do is we basically layer these things together, similar to defense in depth, right? Like, you put these 2 things together, and what this actually looks like is leveraging the fast path, go hit as much as you possibly can, and then anything that you miss, we make sure we have a redundant, reliable path that we'll keep retrying until it works, that is a little bit slower. So to put some kind of like numbers to that, the fast path will make a change on approximately 99.9% of our infrastructure in sub 5 seconds. Right? Like, and that 99.9% is repeatable and reliable. And then the slow, reliable path runs on the order of 60 seconds. And that system will kind of like keep trying until it succeeds, basically. So by leveraging these 2 together, we get kind of like the best of both worlds. And if one of those subsystems completely kind of goes down, it doesn't mean that everything is down. We'll still kind of like get to where we need to be maximum 5 minutes later. So those 2 things together give us this responsiveness and agility with the kind of like reliability that we're looking for. there's other like fun little things to make sure that we have some redundancies. Like, how do you kick these systems off? Like, a lot of systems have chatbots integrated, so it's very, very easy. Anyone can do it from anywhere in the world on their phone. A lot of other things have APIs. There's a CLI for a lot of the subsystems. So making sure that there's not just one way to kick these tasks off is another example of kind of like how we try to build in redundancy so that we can always we have that operational agility at our fingertips, irrespective of what's happening or what kind of like particular system might be experiencing an issue. We make sure that we have control, and the operational ability that we need.
Awesome.
A lot of these things, are all general purpose. Like I said, we leverage them for as much as we possibly can. Everything from kind of like our own infrastructure workflows, like taking a machine out of production and patching it, all the way through to kind of like customer configuration changes. It all leverages the same core system that we dog food and leverage ourselves aggressively, so the product that we expose to our customers is reliable and very, very solid.
Awesome. Appreciate that, Dave and Marcel. I think you talked about a lot of best practices or considerations that security teams can apply to their practice. So appreciate those tips. Yeah, I know you guys have definitely dealt with some really interesting 0-day examples in the wild to protect Edgio and our customers. I'm sure you have some good stories and applications of these best practices. Yeah, would you be able to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one that's most pertinent, or most recent, I guess, and it was kind of interesting, is, you mentioned it earlier, is the HTTP2 rapid reset attack. Um, that was a very kind of like interesting experience. So just to kind of like relay it from Edgio's perspective, there's a little blog that we wrote up on this guy as it happened. H2 Rapid Reset was a 0-day attack where people realized that the not only kind of like the implementation of most HTTP2 server libraries had taken kind of something in the HTTP2 RFC, the specification, the protocol specification, as a general recommendation, and basically codified that in the libraries themselves. And that was the kind of like the number of concurrent requests that were allowed to be kind of like the concurrent streams that were allowed to be in flight on a particular connection, which was in the spec kind of like written as being 100. That coupled with an interesting little facet of H2, which is the idea being kind of like to multiplex lots and lots of requests on a single TCP socket, and the ability to cancel requests, led to this very, very interesting kind of like vulnerability, or DDoS vulnerability. The whole point there, what the attackers are looking for, is something that costs a small amount for the attacker and costs more for the attackee, for the person on the other end. And they found it in HTTP2 Rapid Reset. What that basically meant was the attacker could very, very, very quickly cram into like a single packet, initiating a request and then canceling it over and over and over, like hundreds of those on a single on a single packet, and send it to the server. The server then has to do a lot more work than just sending a single packet. We have to create a request. Oftentimes we have to initiate a proxy connection. That's what CDNs do, to go and fetch whatever asset the attacker was requesting. And then finally, we have to log that the request happened. So the fact that the attackers were able to generate those kind of like initiation and cancellation of the requests very, very quickly, basically most, like anyone who kind of like came under that attack, it's more expensive. It was more expensive to process them than it was to generate them, and so that becomes kind of like a DDoS vulnerability. We like lots of other kind of like folks in the industry, were attacked by that, and everyone was attacked at around the same time, which made it particularly interesting. It was a very kind of like broad attack. I would love to kind of like understand what the attackers were thinking when they started that, because they were attacking like many providers all at the same time. Which we discovered when we started talking to the other providers and be like, oh, when did you see this? Oh, that's exactly the same time that we saw it, which we stumbled into because we found the attack. We identified kind of like what was happening. because of the observability that Marcel's talking about. And we started building mitigations, right? So that mitigation looks like adding even more observability to kind of like get at the heart of exactly what was happening, and then building operational controls that let us tweak basically a response to it. So what that actually looked like was like keep track of how many times any client is resetting requests on a particular socket, and if the percentage there goes above a predefined threshold, terminate that connection. So the idea is basically to kind of like not allow the attacker to kind of like continually send these requests, to put a cap on it, and hence be able to mitigate the attack. So we published that blog after we'd kind of like built that mitigation, deployed it, enacted it, and validated that it was in fact kind of like preventing those attacks from recurring. Then we had folks from the industry reach out and like, oh, we saw the blog. We were actually also kind of like impacted by that, and we're working on kind of like responsible disclosure. So we folded in with a group from the industry, worked with like Vince, which is a part of the CERT, to kind of like go through the responsible disclosure flow, make sure that in this case the folks who were implementing HTTP2 libraries or HTTP2 servers had time to generate patches, deploy those patches before the vulnerability was kind of like more widely publicized. So it was a very, very interesting flow. We were able to turn that around very quickly, right? Like in part because of the work that we do on hygiene and operational visibility and agility, we were able to kind of have a very small change to make, right? Like it wasn't, oh my goodness, we have to upgrade this library. And we're like 10 versions behind because we don't regularly update it. It wasn't that. It was like, actually, we're one version behind, right? Like because we regularly patch, upgrade that, the risk is reduced because it's a small hop, which means you can do it very quickly whilst maintaining, that low risk threshold that we have. So we did that very, very quickly, and we're able to roll it out and mitigate the attack. And then we put up the blog without knowing that the attack had kind of like hit more people, in part to kind of like try to socialize with not only our customers, but the industry, like, hey, this is something weird that we saw, which looks like it's nothing specific to Edgio, and in fact, potentially more applicable. And it turned out that it was.
That's really interesting. It's kind of cool to see like an inside view of a security community across the globe working together to improve outcomes for everyone. Marcel, did you want to add anything around this case or?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a note that I think this example was an interesting one in which the initial observability that we had definitely showed strange behaviors, as Dave was sort of describing, right? This interaction of sort of lower level protocol feature with the higher level behaviors of the CDN created some really unexpected behaviors. And part of figuring out what was going on here was understanding that there was this severe imbalance, right? That the number of requests we were seeing versus the number of requests we were actually delivering back to clients was skewed, right? And that stood out. And even though those were both metrics we had been collecting, we hadn't been comparing them in exactly that way. So part of the outcome of this was to sit down and look at it and say, hey, how can we combine the visibility we already have into something that is tailor-made for detecting this issue? And we were able to do exactly that and sort of improve the scope of our visibility by looking at the data we already had through a slightly different lens.
Awesome. That's good to keep in mind, and thank you for that, Marcel. Yeah, guys. So I think we're wrapping up. If there's any additional recommendations you want to share, I think we covered at a high level some very good ones.
Good question. I think a general recommendation is hygiene is critically important. Focusing on your observability. I think the thing that I would call out is find people who can help. Right, like part of the value, the kind of like critical value proposition that a company like Edgio provides is we can definitely help. Right, like you have a whole kind of like team of people like myself and Marcel who are working on this and working on proactively preventing whole classes of attacks from impacting folks. So find people who can help. Right, like there's a bunch of tools and technology that we build that the community has kind of like available that can make your job kind of like easier. When we're talking about generally things on the internet, a WAF is the most critical. Like the most basic, also I would argue the most critical example of something like that. It gives you the ability, if it's implemented, appropriately, it gives you the ability to kind of like combine the agility and the safety elements together. So the Edgio WAF, runs in a dual mode, which means you can deploy kind of like new rules to production to the actual machines that are getting it, that are observing the traffic, and you can see what is happening. A good example of that was with Log4j, which was, going back in time a tiny little bit. When we developed the response to that, we were able to develop the rule very, very quickly and validate it very, very quickly because we were pushing rule updates and able to deploy them in alert mode on the actual machines and see that they matched the attacks, show our customers that they either were not getting attacked or were getting attacked, and then make a very kind of like data-driven decision to enable that rule kind of like into blocking mode and actually kind of like prevent those attacks from making it through to our customers. So there are like it kind of combines all of those things together, right? Like speed of responsiveness, safety, and redundancy and reliability. Get people who can help. I think would be my key recommendation.
That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that, Dave. Yeah, I mean, we're responding to 0 days. Time is critical. So having these specialized solutions, but also more importantly, the people that can help you through this is key to closing that door on attackers. So with that, guys, thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to thank the audience as well, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, guys.